You're fine.
My AirPods. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Mankel. Thank you, Janet, for the introduction. And I'm going to briefly talk to you all about the legal aspects of what this is all about, ADA web accessibility, and what's been going on in the legal side of this. And Bruce will follow up and talk to you a little bit about the technical side of it. We recently thought this would be a good idea, Cardiff 101, because there was another business that's a member of Cardiff 101. I won't name them for privacy reasons, that was recently received an attorney demand letter stating that their website for their restaurant was in violation of the ADA concerning web accessibility. And this struck some fear into the business owner as to how to deal with it and how much money it was going to cost to get out from under it. And I think and hope that business owner was able to resolve it fairly easily, but it brought to mind that it would be a good idea, perhaps, and Allison, thank you for bringing this up, to have a conversation with the local community and particularly businesses in the community about this fairly new form of litigation, and I could call it in some ways a shakedown by lawyers, but there is some real meaning behind it. And really trying to advise you on what it's all about and how to take proactive efforts at this point to avoid being a target for these types of actions. So with that, let me just start off and share my my slides and tell me if, Janet, can you see those okay? Or whoever's not on mute, can you just tell me, can you see the slides?
No, can't see anything except for all of us.
Oh, you know what? I think I need to, I'm sorry. I think I have to do a share screen here.
Yeah.
We practiced this and I thought I would have had this down and obviously I don't. So let me just do a quick share screen. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Let's see. Can you guys see my slides now?
Yep, we see your slides and your notes.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I gotta swap them. How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So let's talk, I want to talk first a little bit about the background of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is shorthand ADA. I'm sure many of you have probably heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was something that Congress, our federal government, passed into law in 1990, and broadly was meant to prohibit or reduce barriers for those who have some forms of disabilities. Title III in particular prohibits discrimination against those with disabilities by any place of public accommodation. And so this is really where we're talking about these types of lawsuits affecting private businesses, hotels, restaurants, and then public businesses, public entities like schools or libraries, and also retail shops. And I think that most of you may be familiar with ADA in sort of a traditional world that involves allowing or having your particular business have be wheelchair accessible, having handicapped parking in an area near your business. If you're a restaurant, maybe having a certain counter height so that someone with a wheelchair can sit at a counter and enjoy a meal, and bathrooms, things of that nature. The ADA is enforceable by the government, but it is also enforceable by private individuals. And so as a result, this is where you find plaintiffs that have disabilities being arguably recruited by plaintiffs' attorneys going out there and filing lawsuits or demand letters against businesses that I'm sure are not in any way knowingly discriminating against people that have disabilities, but rather unknowingly and unaware of the fact that some of the things around their business might not be up to the levels of ADA compliance. In addition to the federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's a similar law here in California called the Unruh Civil Rights Act, very similar to the ADA and often utilized by plaintiffs here in California. And it has some slight differences in that it allows up to 3 times actual damages, and it also allows for at least some form of statutory damages. So in instances where a plaintiff's lawyer may not be able to sue under the ADA, they will try to sue or file a claim under the Unruh Civil Rights Act for California state law. I talked to you a little bit about the traditional world of ADA actions that you would have seen years ago. But more recently, in the last probably 5 to 6 years, there's been a creep into the digital world. And as more businesses are having an online presence, and particularly in the goods world, whether it's retail products and clothing, or even restaurants, the ADA has said, and the state and the laws have moved along and said, yes, failure to provide individuals with disabilities access to your goods and services on your website could be a violation of the ADA or the California state law. California happens to be the second most popular state in the US for these claims to be filed after New York, and I think Florida is number 3. So this is something that has certainly started to move in the direction of looking at web accessibility. Just some examples when people might think, well, how is someone that's in a wheelchair unable to or file a violation relating to my website concerning web accessibility? Not so much somebody that has a physical disability in that they can't walk or something of that nature, but rather oftentimes this involves people who are blind or have vision impairment, also people that are hard of hearing, epileptics, or colorblind. And often in my personal experience, I have many clients who have unknowingly been the subject of these types of lawsuits involving plaintiffs who have vision impairment. And oftentimes a person with vision impairment, when they are online scanning the internet, they're using some sort of screen reading software that will allow them to move their cursor over certain images and other types of things that Bruce will talk more about that will allow what that image is to be read out loud using certain types of screen reading software. And this is where oftentimes it's found that websites that have been created by businesses or their third-party IT vendors do not have the coding on the back end of those websites that allow for these types of screen reading software and other types of things to function properly. And this is ultimately where there's a claim that there's a violation of the ADA or California law for lack of web accessibility. This is just an example, or just a chart that shows the uptick over the last 6 years in the number of web accessibility lawsuits filed throughout the country. And you can see there was a huge jump from 2016 to 2017 and then 18, and it's gotten progressively higher, albeit at a slower pace. But ultimately, between 2016 and 2021, there's been a 1,400% increase in these types of lawsuits. And so this is obviously a reason we wanted to bring this to the attention of our community here to help you be aware of it, number one, and try to take, again, some proactive steps to prevent being a target and low-hanging fruit for these types of lawsuits. So just an example of how these claims do commonly arise, what to do and how to handle them, and then sort of the best advice and how to avoid going forward. My experience often is that these claims often come in the form of one of two things. One, they could come in the form of a demand letter from a lawyer, namely a lawyer sending a letter to the business advising them of a violation or alleged violation under the ADA or California law concerning their website, and demanding or threatening a formal lawsuit if there isn't some sort of payment being made. Sometimes there's, I know in some past experiences, you can get a lawyer to help you and quickly respond to that letter. And oftentimes, or sometimes, the plaintiff's lawyers will go away. And all you'll have to worry about is getting your website up to where it needs to be. But sometimes you might not be so lucky, and there might actually be a civil complaint that's filed against you or form a lawsuit without any warning letter. In that case, you're going to have a little more work to do. It's probably going to be a little more expensive because you're going to have to deal with this. These cases are very tough to dismiss very quickly on legal grounds, unfortunately, particularly in California, because the laws do favor plaintiffs in these types of situations. But with if this happens, don't get crazy about it. There's ways to navigate it as quickly and as painlessly and hopefully as cost effectively as possible. And ultimately, it's likely you'll wind up settling, not taking this to an actual trial and remediating your website. And this goes into what to do and how to handle. If you ever were to get a demand letter from a lawyer or a civil complaint, do not ignore it. It's not just going to likely go away on its own. The best thing to do is to immediately seek legal counsel's assistance and potentially IT support if you have somebody either in-house that does your web development, or maybe you have a third party that's helped you develop your website. And Bruce can talk more about that and what can be done to it. But that's really where you want to go first, is get some help from on the outside so that you know how best to handle this and do it in a quick and hopefully efficient manner. Usually what's done is the letter, in my personal experience, I'll look at the letter, I'll try to determine the plaintiff and the lawyer representing the plaintiff, and are these the types of entities that are in this serial mode of filing lawsuits, and how sophisticated they are, or is this somebody just sending a quick letter and hoping for a quick payout? I can then try to handle the legal side of that as quickly as possible. But it would also make sense at that point too, to have your website actually looked at on the back end to determine to what level your website is out of compliance under the ADA web accessibility guidelines. And to that point, unfortunately, at this point, there are no federal or state formal guidelines for what you would have to do to be considered outside the scope of being in violation of a web accessibility ADA type matter. But the good news is that there is a entity out there called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines Group, WCAG, which has actually published certain iterations of guidelines that is pretty much what everybody follows. And plaintiff lawyers also understand that that's what would be used for now until the government comes out and says, this is going to be the new gold standard for your website and what it has to include. The WCAG is the standards that somebody like Bruce or some other IT support individual would look to and say, your website is out of compliance for these reasons, and this is what we need to do to fix it. So that's sort of what to do and how to handle it. If in fact you get a demand letter or a civil complaint, it's really, again, as much as some people might think this is a shakedown and you want to fight it to the bitter end, it's really just not worth your time and energy. It's best to try to settle as quickly as possible. Maybe they'll go away with nothing, but if they filed a lawsuit, in all likelihood, they're looking for some settlement amount. And it just depends on the size of your business and the sophistication of the plaintiff, how much that settlement amount would be. In my experience on some of my bigger clients, and I'm talking about fairly large clients in the hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues, they might settle for $20,000 to $50,000. I'm hoping that smaller businesses can get out for much less than that. But this is where you say, look, take some action now. Spend a little bit of money now with IT support, somebody to help you with this, and get your website where it needs to be now. And then you will likely stay out from under the radar of these plaintiff lawyers. And that leads to this best advice on how to avoid these things. There's no guarantee, but of course, again, the taking a little bit of active steps now. This would involve doing a website audit and a remediation of anything that actually needs to be remediated and resolved in terms of coding, following the WCAG standards. and also a web accessibility statement. And these are basically in the footer of some websites. You'll see either an icon of a wheelchair or the words web accessibility, and you click on that and there'll usually be a statement that says, you know, this business seeks to allow all those with disabilities to have access to our goods. And for this reason, this is what we do. And we're constantly looking at this. And these are just to sort of signify, yes, we're aware of this and we're doing what we can to allow everyone to have access to our website. So that's all I have, everyone. I'll take some questions after Bruce is finished and we're at the Q&A section. This is my contact information. If anybody wants to follow up with me, I can talk to them a little bit more about the legal sides of this. I also work with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses in the area on everything from business formation, corporate and securities matters, to contracts and some dispute resolution. So thank you very much, everybody.
Great. Bruce, I will pass this off to you.
All right. Well, let's check first to make sure everybody can hear me. You can just respond in the chat. Okay, any echo? Because I do have my AirPods in. No echo. All right, great. Let me just share screen here. Okay. Everybody see my screen right now? All right. Looks like you can. Well, as Jonathan mentioned, I am on the IT side of things. So I'm the managing partner of Devour, which is a web development agency that specializes in building customized websites, primarily for the hospitality industry, although we have worked for engineering firms and nonprofits and hotels and things like that as well. My specialization is in front-end web development, accessibility, and user experience design. We've also designed and built an advanced learning management system for the hospitality industry to train their staff on beer, wine, spirits, that sort of thing, which will be launched this year. But as a starting point, let's kind of go over what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about how to stay compliant, how to get compliant, first of all, how to stay compliant, how to hire. We're going to go over quick history. Jonathan covered some of this history already, so we're going to kind of blast through that section. Most importantly, we're going to go through the technical requirements from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is currently at version 2.1. And what's usually used in the legal system is AA compliance. AAA compliance is usually used for the governmental organizations, and single A compliance is usually ignored. So quick history as a starting point. We've got the 1959 Unruh Civil Rights Act, right? Jonathan mentioned this briefly. So this is a guy named Jesse M. Unruh, who was a member of the California State Assembly. And basically, John went over this already as far as what it covers, but this was in 1959, so I think that's all you need to remember from this moment. Additionally, we had the Rehabilitation Act in 1973, which was signed into law by Richard Nixon, and that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs conducted by federal agencies. Later on, in 1986, Ronald Reagan added Section 508, which was a non-binding guideline for technology accessibility. After that, in 1998, President Bill Clinton signed into law the Workforce Investment Act of 1998, which includes Rehabilitation Act amendments that create binding and enforceable standards and incorporated these standards into federal procurement regulations requiring that electronic information technology developed, procured, or maintained by the use of federal government be accessible to people with disabilities. Rewind 8 years to 1990, and that's when the American Disabilities Act was signed into law by President George Bush Sr. There was Title I, Title II, and Title III sections of this. Title I was employment, Title II was public sector for state and local government, and Title III is what concerns us. That's the public accommodations and services operated by private entities. So this is the stuff that affects like hotels and restaurants, things like that. And this sets the minimum standard for accessibility for alterations and new construction of commercial facilities. So this kind of directs businesses to make reasonable modifications, which is pretty subjective, obviously, to the usual ways of doing things when serving people with disabilities. It requires that businesses take steps necessary to communicate effectively with customers with vision, hearing, and speech impairment. It's regulated and enforced by the US Department of Justice. So if you're looking at these photos and you think, look, does anything about these old white men signing papers in offices and on fancy lawns make you think that they had websites in mind? And of course, they did not. The ADA doesn't specifically mention websites or address online compliance, and neither do any of these other laws or acts that were signed. But as Jonathan pointed out, in about 2016, these lawsuits started to become very prevalent. And now we have precedent. So why make your website accessible? So there's liability. Jonathan's covered this, so we won't go over that too much, but that's an obvious one. There's also responsibility, ethics, increase in diversity and inclusivity. Even the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities by the United Nations called upon accessible websites as a human right. So in the same way that you don't really want to block people who are disabled from eating at your restaurant, you don't really ethically want them to not be able to read the menu or call you, look you up, etc. Trying to avoid these kinds of situations digitally. Lastly, we also have a return on investment. Web accessibility increases your audience. Between 15 and 25% of the world's population has a disability. Many accessibility requirements are also just good practices for websites, practices that Google recognizes and rewards with a bump in search results. Essentially, accessibility is good for search engine optimization. Accessible websites are mobile friendly. Over 51% of users are on mobile devices, and most restaurant searches happen on a mobile device. 90% convert within a single hour. Accessibility helps capture those leads. I'd say lastly, a lot of accessibility requirements are just good design for users' experience in general. Sure, a 4.5:1 contrast ratio on text will help somebody with low visibility see the content better. But let's be honest, nobody enjoys seeing text on a low contrast background. It's just ugly and difficult to read, and this is not just inconvenient for people with a disability. So Jonathan mentioned W3C. Well, he mentioned their work, the WCAG 2.1 Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Who drafted that is the World Wide Web Consortium. And it has been used as the regulation so far, most commonly. So we're going to go over that. These are the technical requirements. It's essentially broken up into 4 components. The first component is perceivable. So that's like alt text. This isn't going to be all inclusive. I'm just going to talk about a few examples so you kind of understand what the technical requirements are. But actually, there's like well over 100 different technical requirements. Each of them have sub requirements. So this is something that you have to have somebody very technical look at. But alt text is just when you have images on the website, is there a text encoded so that the screen reader can read a description of that text to somebody who can't see the image. Captions on videos. If you have video, you have to have captions for people with disabilities. There's adaptive design versus responsive design. Adaptive design means that when you resize your screen, maybe you're on a mobile device or you switch from laptop to a desktop, that the content of the website is actually responsive and adaptive to that. It'll actually move around Technically responsive means that it'll resize the screen. Adaptive means that it'll move the components around appropriately. Adaptive is what you're looking for. It's important that meaning is not conveyed solely with color. You know, if you have an error message or something like that, it shouldn't just be something that turns red. It should also have different text, different label, something that where if somebody's colorblind, they'll still be able to perceive that change. Scrolling in 2 dimensions. So if you maybe have a small screen, you shouldn't have to scroll left or right and up or down. You should be able to scroll in just 1 dimension. This is a common problem for screens that don't resize properly. Contrast ratios is a big one. We won't get into the specifications of that, but generally a 3.5 or 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio is expected. If you have black text on white in the background, as we see here, this would be a very high contrast, so it's easy for people to see. So those are all perceivable technical requirements. The second one is operable. So you'll see something like accessible with keyboard only. So you need to be able to navigate the website without a mouse. That's particularly important for screen readers, since somebody with a screen reader is likely blind and they very likely cannot see any kind of mouse movement. They need to use the keyboard exclusively. So everything needs to be accessible by keyboard. No flashing elements. People with seizures and that sort of thing can be affected by this. There's some very specific requirements about flashing. Generally, anything that flashes 3 times, I think, becomes out of compliance, but that's an important one. There should be more than one way to reach a web page. So every page on your website should be accessible, not just through the navigation at the top, but also through the footer or through searchable, through a search bar or something like that. Headings are descriptive and in logical order. So when you have titles to sections or the titles to the page, it should all be descriptive as to what is the actual topic of that content, and it should be in order. This is a very common violation of compliance that we've seen. Web pages have titles. A lot of web pages don't have titles at all. You have what's called H1 headers, and you should have one for every single page of your site. We see this out of compliance, maybe most frequently. Click targets are at least 44 pixels by 44 pixels. This is another example of operable technical requirements. This is actually going to change in version 2.2 of WCAG, which is going to come out maybe in June, and it'll be 24 by 24 pixels. So they're actually reducing that requirement. Basically, when somebody clicks on a target, so they can, a button or whatever, maybe an image, whatever it is, it needs to be large enough so that somebody with very little mobility can actually click on it easily. The third requirement is understandable. So language of the page needs to be declared programmatically. This is something you never see on a website, but it's in the back end. And so if your site's in English, for example, you have to declare that programmatically so screen readers can determine that. You have to have consistent order of navigation items. So the navigation bar, for example, let's say it says homepage, menus, catering, contact. Every page has to have it in that order. That has to do with predictability, and that's an important technical requirement and can cause you to be out of compliance. Components on different pages are labeled consistently. An example of this would be like if you had a search bar and it's called search on one page, you can't call it find on another page. It needs to be called search on every page if that's what you call it. This kind of predictability is an important thing. Input assistance. This is like when you're filling out a form, the system should have labels and instructions for the form inputs. And if there's errors, then those need to be actually stated programmatically. We've all had a form where it failed, but nobody knows why. It just kicks you out, and then you have to start over, and you can't really remedy the issue. Input assistance is important for compliance. That's kind of where input errors are identified. Labels or instructions are provided for user input. Again, this is for forms mostly, but it can be for other things. The last technical requirement is called robust. This one is not particularly large. The only one we're going to mention right now is semantic HTML. So that's the coding language that your website is written in for the structure. And essentially it just means that it's written in a way that that your code is the role of the code is stated. So rather than saying, just having all this structure with no labels on anything, there's coding attached to everything that shows what is the role of that code, and it gives it meaning to the screen readers and to the user. So this one's a bit technical, so we're not going to get into that one. There's paid programming auditing you can do. So it's a programmatic auditing system. They don't do that much, frankly. They only cover about 30% of the issues that you have, but they do some things. Accessibility is an example of that. Another one is UserWay. I think UserWay might be the most popular. And AudioEye is another lesser known programmatic auditing system. They cost about $50 a month. They're a starting point. There's free programmatic auditing. They also don't do that much, but they're free, so I recommend them. We have Wave, and also Google has something called Lighthouse, which is a Chrome plugin that you can actually install and do an audit on your own site for free, and it'll kind of kick out, let you know what's wrong with it. Again, it only covers about 30% of the issues because programs can't really detect everything. Even AI has its limitations, but it is a starting point. So that's a good point to start with. We can go over real quick how accessibility is implemented. So if you don't know your website is compliant or not, then it's not. ADA or 508 compliance or anything like this isn't something you can accidentally achieve. The only way to be compliant and protect yourself from liability is to take specific steps to reach compliance and then maintain that standard from that point forward through documented processes. So the first part is architecture. This is something that the developer is going to do. So this is the actual structure and HTML code of the website. This isn't something you can do in-house. You need to have somebody build the site with the correct architecture. If it's built without the correct structure, then it can't be ADA compliant. The design itself is also important. Color contrast and that sort of thing is very important for text. Things like, do you have text over the tops of images that can't be read? The designer should be able to make a compliant site. If you have a website that's already existing and you're trying to alter that design, then this is something that you can do. But again, probably need a professional designer to be doing it. Development. This is the actual coding part of this. So once we have the design, we'll take the design and code it into a website. And at that point, there's all kinds of errors that can be made for accessibility. Generally speaking, that has to do with, let's say you have added an image or something like that. You can add it as a background image, or you can add it as what's called a div. Choosing these things correctly dictates whether your site is compliant or not. And it's not something you can look at a site and tell whether it's compliant. You actually have to look into the code and dig deep. There is one area of compliance that you can control all by yourself, and that is the content. So assuming you've gotten the architecture, the design, and the development right, or you've remediated your current site to get to that point, this is the part that becomes most important. Content. So, if you have an image, you need to add alt text to it, which is something that you can be trained to do. Your titles for your sections need to be labeled appropriately. If you have the ability to change the labels on your buttons on your website, they need to be appropriately labeled. One of the buttons we see all the time, it says learn more. We see it all the time where every single button on the website says learn more. To a person with a screen reader, they actually have no idea what that content is referring to. So these kinds of content choices are incredibly important. We have content management systems as well to think about. There's templated builders like Squarespace and Wix. And these systems actually cannot really get you to compliance. At some point, they may update these systems, but at the moment, you can't be in compliance with Squarespace or Wix. They haven't built the systems robustly enough to do that. So this is a big problem for companies that are relying on these systems for their website. Things like alt text and that sort of thing can be added to some of these sections, on Squarespace and Wix, but you just don't have access to the code as a user on these platforms in a meaningful way. So you really can't be compliant on these sites for the most part. There are some platforms that give you more control. One example would be WordPress. I'm sure a lot of you have websites hosted on WordPress. One of the issues with WordPress is that you'll often end up with a template that's built on WordPress that wasn't built to be accessible. So you can make a website accessible on WordPress, but you need to either build it from scratch or make sure that you start with a template that is already built with accessibility in mind. Another platform, which is the platform we specialize in, is Webflow. Webflow also has templates, and some of those templates are also not accessible. So that's something to keep in mind. However, we only build custom websites on Webflow, in which case they are all accessible. It's also much easier to take a template on Webflow and make it accessible because you have a lot more access to the code. So as far as accessibility is concerned, Webflow, in my opinion, is the ideal candidate for that system. However, you can accomplish it on WordPress, usually at a greater expense. So how do you find somebody to make your site specifically ADA compliant? Well, you need to ask the question, first of all. A lot of developers have no idea what ADA compliance are. You know, there's a lot of confusion about ADA compliance or 508 compliance specifically. 508 refers to governmental compliance. If you don't ask the question, you'll never know whether they've actually built ADA compliant websites or have any knowledge of that specifically. I would say that most agencies right now are not building ADA compliant sites. So this is important. Don't use templates that aren't built with accessibility in mind. We just mentioned that. Do ask about staff training. Any agency that's going to build your site or rebuild your site or redesign your site to be ADA compliant should be willing to train your staff to maintain its compliance. Because the reality is that we could build a perfect website with perfect accessibility, and the moment you upload an image or something like that without alt text, the site becomes not compliant. So it's not something that just you do once and you forget about it. You have to have some staff training and kind of stay with it. If you are hiring somebody, you should ask them for a website that they built with ADA compliance. Maybe just for an example for yourself, but you would like to know, I think, that the company you're hiring has actually built sites with ADA compliance, because they're probably not going to get it right the first time. They need some experience doing it. There's a lot to ADA compliance, and you know, you're going to want to make sure that they've been studying this subject for a while and that they have some real world experience building ADA compliant websites. Lastly, make sure that ADA compliance is in your service agreement. So if you do hire a company to fix your site or to make a new site for you that's ADA compliant, make sure that it's actually in the service agreement. So, you know, a lot of time we'll see somebody that's talked to agency and they said, oh yeah, we should redo ADA compliant websites. But then when they deliver it, it's not actually ADA compliant. You want to make sure this is in the service agreement so that you know you can expect that it's ADA compliant. And then if they deliver a site that's not ADA compliant, you can lean on that service agreement and demand that they fix it. Once you're compliant, how do you stay compliant? Well, as I mentioned, partnership with agencies is important. Ongoing training is often necessary. Every time a new set of standards for WCAG comes out, you're going to need more training on that subject on how to stay compliant. Repeatable processes. If you have trained your staff to upload images with alt text, and you have trained your staff on, you know, when they're writing content or adding headings to a section, how to make it the right heading level and how to make it, you know, on topic. You want to have documented processes that say, like, this is how we do it every time, because it's a lot to remember and people are going to forget. So we find ourselves constantly retraining our clients on accessibility, and that's just, you know, part of the name of the game. Really, we don't expect anything different. So document the process as much as possible, and do stay up to date. You know, WCAG 2.2 is coming out probably in June this year. There's not that many alterations to the requirements, but you do want to stay up to date on it and make sure you're aware and ahead of things that are coming up. And that's where diligence comes in. You know, the only way to stay compliant is to be diligent about it. You're never going to be compliant by accident. You're always going to have to put some effort into it. If you do it with a decent amount of consistency and you make sure you're compliant and stay compliant with some basic training, it's actually not that hard to accomplish, but it won't happen on its own. So again, I'm Bruce from Devour Creative, which is a web development agency here in San Diego. If you'd like to reach us, you can reach us at this contact information. My personal contact information is up on the screen as well. Even if you just have some questions, feel free to shoot us an email. We can always help you find an agency to do compliance work for you if we don't work with your platform. In general, we're happy to help.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. And now, can everybody see and hear me?
We can hear you, Janet, but we still see Bruce's screen.
Oh, okay. So I'm also going to share my screen so you guys have both Jonathan and Bruce's contact information. You can go to their websites. And now to our Q&A. We have about 5-10 minutes left. So does anybody have any questions for either Jonathan or Bruce?
Bruce, I have a quick question for you. This is Allison, and I turned my video off just to make sure that the flow everybody could hear me. I did want to know, when you said that people have to be trained, in your professional opinion, if you get a website redone, do you also train the people who work at the company that you created the website for? Because I can see that some of these people are they're 1 or 2 employees in their business, or it's an in-home business, and just wanted to, understand the process, not only if a website is redone, but how the training takes place.
Yeah, absolutely. In every case, we provide training. Even before ADA compliance was really becoming big, we train staff on how to use their website in a general sense. You need to know how to use the content management system or add pages, whatever you need to do. With ADA compliance, that just adds a few extra things. When we build these sites, we build them to be relatively foolproof. So we try to make it as easy to be compliant as possible. And we essentially just create forms that you can fill out. For anytime you want to add an upload an image, there'll be a section right there that says enter alt text, and has a description of what alt text means with some examples. And alt text essentially is just a description of the image for somebody with visibility issues. So we kind of make it easy in that way, but there is some training that's required for H1 or H2 headers in the text and things like that. So overall, it takes about an hour, maybe hour and a half to train an individual on basic content accessibility guidelines. We usually do a couple of videos that were recorded that you can always reference later as well, and sometimes some written documentation.
Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Grove. I am the executive director of the Del Mar Association in Del Mar, which is a Main Street organization there. We actually wear a lot of hats. So we're also a kind of a pseudo TBID, if you know what that is, a Tourist Business Improvement District also. I have a question in terms of, do you have a website, let's say a restaurant website that's an example of an ADA compliant website that you could share with us, just so that those of us see that, perhaps one that's been done recently?
Yeah, sure. You could go to Vigilucci's website, Vigilucci's restaurant group. That site has been done in the last year, and that's an accessible website with an accessibility statement as well on that site, which is an important element to accessibility. So I think it's vigiluccis.com. and you can just kind of look around there.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I appreciate that. And then do you work, Jonathan, specifically with at all with Squarespace sites? You mentioned there was only certain sites that you work with or web platforms. Is that one that you do work with?
Sorry, is this a question for John or for me?
Yeah, I think that might have been for Bruce.
I'm sorry for Bruce. I'm sorry for
Yeah.
Bruce.
So your question is whether we work with Squarespace platforms?
In terms of, getting them, transforming them into a more compliant.
Yeah, so we can take, we're Squarespace Circle members and that sort of thing from way back. And we've been involved in beta testing with them and such. So we're very familiar with Squarespace, and we do have a couple clients that are still hosted on Squarespace. We can make your Squarespace site more compliant, but there are limitations to the compliance you can reach with Squarespace. Technically speaking, if your site is simple enough, you could have a fully compliant website on Squarespace, but we rarely see that. So what we generally recommend is if you have a site on Squarespace if you want to keep the design and you don't want to put a ton of money into it, we essentially just port the exact design over to Webflow so that you can be fully compliant. But you can certainly improve accessibility on your Squarespace site.
Okay, thank you.
I saw a question in the chat from Karen Keller asking if you aren't actually selling anything or selling very little, is litigation still a threat? I think the answer is yes. Perhaps you're not as much on the radar of some of these plaintiff lawyers as they usually go through and try to attack the bigger fish first and get bigger payouts. I mean, even my own practice, my own law firm selling services is potentially at risk of getting hit. So I'd have to know a little bit more about what your business is, but you could, in the sense that you're offering a service beyond just goods, I still think it's in your best interest to do what you can to try to achieve some level of compliance. If you're purely an informational website and you're not offering a service or a good, I'd have to sort of explore that a little bit more and find out if there's been any instances of lawsuits against those types of sites. I think it's probably less likely, but in today's day and age, we're talking mostly, and for the purpose of at least of this webinar, is a lot of the local businesses in the community that are not only restaurants, but also, any sort of accounting, professional practice. And the other thing to note is you don't necessarily also have to have a formal brick and mortar retail location plus a website in order to be targeted. In some jurisdictions, in California is one, simply having a website on its own is enough. So that's just something to be aware of. And I had a question for Bruce, sort of for the crowd, and not, I don't want to put Bruce too much on the spot because I know each case is a little bit different. But Bruce, do you have any sort of general ideas to the cost to someone to utilize third-party services like your own to help with the remediation or auditing of these types of sites?
Yeah, sure. I can go over that briefly. There is a wide range, as you can imagine, because it does depend on what kind of site you have and what you're doing. But I can kind of cover some of that range. If you're looking for a total rebuild of a website from scratch, totally rebuilding it with accessibility in mind, and your website that you're looking for has a certain amount of customizability, then you might be looking at somewhere around $15,000. If on the very other end of the spectrum, you're looking for, let's say you're already on Webflow, a content management system that lends itself well to accessibility, and you basically just have a few issues here or there, or you need some basic training on it and some modification of the text and maybe a little bit of the structure, then maybe you could get away with under 2,000. So it really does have a pretty wide range, whether it's a rebuild or just remediation of your current site. It can be very difficult to do remediation on certain platforms. One of those platforms often tends to be WordPress, because people will be using templates, and those templates are often not designed for accessibility and can't be modified in a meaningful way to be accessible. as a result, the only way to fix those sites, to really fix them, is to rebuild the site on a different template or completely custom without a template. So it does depend on the platform you're currently on and your goal, but anywhere from $2,000 to $15,000.
So if
Sorry,
you're
Bruce, one other question. I think, I've had some instances where there's been arguments that clients that I've worked with are trying to get to a level of compliance they deem acceptable in their mind, where they're spending a certain amount of money. So not trying to be perfect, but trying to get to the point where they're at a level where, again, they're maybe less likely a target, or they are already a target and they're trying to just achieve some level of acceptability by the plaintiff. Do you experience these sort of things, or are you somebody that says, look, you want to really try to get to the absolute top level, AA, or whatever the level would be?
Well, I suspect you're asking this question for everyone else's benefit, because I know that you know the answer to part of this, which is that there's no such thing as perfect compliance with accessibility. So in a sense, every single case is that way, where it's not a question of can you be perfectly protected from liability and accessibility, because that's actually not possible. Part of the reason that's not possible is because, as you mentioned before, the laws haven't actually been written into the hard code as to what is accessibility. We tend to lean on WCAG 2.1 AA compliance for private individuals or for small businesses, and AAA compliance for governmental institutions. But the reality is that everything is a spectrum as to what level of risk you're taking. If you have a huge potential liability, then it might make sense to put a lot of money into it and get really, really compliant and just make as much of a strong case for compliance as you can. Generally speaking, most people are looking for a certain level of reasonable compliance. And the reality is, you don't have to be most compliant on the planet. You just have to not be the least compliant. You just don't make yourself a target, So you can actually get away with 80% compliance and probably be fine. And yeah, there's some liability there, but probably not a lot at that point. And a lot of people are comfortable with that.
This is Jen Grove again, another backup question. I think John asked you the question about the cost for utilizing your help. What about the audit component, as opposed to obviously redoing the entire website or even doing a portion of it? Just an understanding of, how significant the issues might be for an organization. Do you guys do that? Or is that something that you refer to these other kind of, I guess, free 30% valid online resources?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And that would be the cheapest option as a starting point. I think you'll see probably companies online that are offering auditing. They'll say, oh, we'll audit your website with professional review, not just a programmatic review. And they'll offer like $2,000 or something like that. We would do an audit for $500 to $800, depending on the site and the size of the site. But that just gives you okay, what are the issues that we have to resolve? It essentially involves us going through the site with a fine-tooth comb and using the programmatic auditing systems as well, but then adding to that our own in-person audits. Ultimately, you'll end up with a list of everything that's wrong with the site, which in most cases is a pretty substantial list. And at that point, you could remediate those issues with any agency you like. You could not remediate them at all if you think your liability is not that high and you think it's worth the risk. But yeah, somewhere in the range of $500 to $800. I would shy away from online companies doing it for $1,500 or $2,000 because unless you have a very robust site with a lot of pages, it shouldn't be that expensive.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
I have a question about if you're developing a new business, would you recommend avoiding some of these platforms and just hosting this on just a standard open platform? I'm thinking of like Namecheap, stuff like that, where you could put the web page development, you control all of it.
Are you referring to using Namecheap's website builder?
No, no, I'm talking about just having them host the site and creating
Okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, I recommend Namecheap for hosting. I think they do quite well for domain registration. As far as hosting your site, probably they're not the best choice.
okay.
Not because they don't do a good job for the price, but because it's very difficult to get robust hosting through an organization like that at the prices they have available, because their goal is to be very, very inexpensive. And as a result, you don't get content delivery networks, or maybe they don't include SSL for security. There's a lot of potential things that you think, oh, this isn't very expensive, but it's because you're not paying for things that you really should be. That being said, hosting does not need to be expensive. If you host through like Webflow, for example, which they have incredible hosting, I think it's about $30 a month. And that kind of hosting is great. I do recommend avoiding certain platforms if you're a new organization. If you're an existing organization, then certainly you have this limitation of like, maybe you've already developed a site and you put money into it. But if you're starting out fresh and you don't have to go with one particular platform or another, then certainly try to make a good decision early on and go with a platform that will grow with you and that you can be accessible on. Webflow is, in my opinion, the very best platform for that. You can do with WordPress in certain instances. But yeah, I think that choosing the right platform early on is very important.
Thanks.
Great. Well, we are just about at time. I again want to thank both Bruce and Jonathan for such helpful information. I know I took away learning a lot. If anyone has any additional questions or wants to know how to reach out to Jonathan or Bruce, feel free to email me. My email address is communications@cardiff101.com. Thank you guys again, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you for hosting that.
Great. Bye.